Hi, my name is Leighton Jin. I'm the Director of Development for the American Documentary and Animation Film Festival. We completed our 13th year, and one of the highlights every year is the Medill program. And one of the highlights of that program this year was Ankita's film, Far From Home. And she's a terrific filmmaker, a very accomplished journalist, being such a young woman. Um, First of all, can you talk to me, explain to people what your film is about?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. My film, Far From Home, is about Afghan refugees in India. So, the reason we decided to focus on refugees in India was because when we talk about refugees, we usually visualize images from Europe. And we talk about all the Western countries not letting in refugees, but we never really look at Asia. And India is one of the few countries in the world that doesn't have a refugee law, along with Pakistan, Iran, Saudi Arabia. That's not a good lot to be in.
Mhm.
Given that it's a developing nation, it's one of the biggest developing nations. It's already overtaken the UK. It's in terms of GDP, it's the world's biggest democracy by population. So there's just so much going for India, but the fact that it doesn't have a basic refugee law for um, a basic thing like refugee rights as like human rights. So that's the reason we made this film, and we focused on the Afghan community because India has a very long standing relationship with Afghanistan that goes back centuries. We have stories from the 1800s and the 1900s of Afghan traders coming into India doing trading. We had India, the greater Hindustan was actually had Afghanistan as part of it. So because India was not originally the current geography, it was still the Hindu Kush mountains in Afghanistan. So that's the reason we looked at the Afghan community, and we looked at a refugee who came to India in 2021, right before the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, and we traced her psyche, her mental state, and her idea of why she came to India and how it's panning out after. So that's pretty much what the film is about.
And can you go a little bit deeper depth at how you found her and her family? Because I'm sure there's a lot to choose from, but how did you find them and how did you decide on them to be the subject of your film?
Yeah, that's a good question. And a difficult one to answer because when we originally pitched the film and we got the funding for it, Samira was not our original subject. It was someone else. So we got the funding based on another subject. And what happened is this is, I think, a classic situation for a lot of journalists and filmmakers. And I'm not the first one to go through this. But what happened was we landed in India, and we had spoken to that original subject for several months. I think we started talking to her in the month of January 2022. And in June, my cinematographer went to the Afghan community in Delhi, met her, met the community leader, and we finalized the subject. He went again in August and had a chat with her. And then I landed in India in September. And when I went to meet her, she just refused to shoot with us, and she just said, I can't do this. Too scared for my daughters. She actually had like four daughters. Two were taken away by the Taliban, and two were with her in India. And she just said, I'm fearing for the lives of my daughters. And I don't know what's going to happen if I come in a documentary. And she also talked about an incident where somebody made a YouTube video of her and put it up without her consent. And it caused a lot of trouble for her because she started getting threats from the Taliban. So it was just a very complicated scenario, and we tried to convince her. We also spoke to a few of the Afghan community leaders, but there was this whole politics going on. There was a protest happening at the UNHCR office. The UNHCR was going to have a conversation with the Afghan refugees. There was so many things, moving parts at that time. I think it was just, I don't know, maybe bad timing or maybe a bad luck for us. I don't know what it was. It was just too many things compounded at once. And at the end, the community leaders went hostile. They said, we have meetings with UNHCR, so we can't risk talking to the media or filmmakers. The subject pretty much absconded, blocked our phone numbers. We had we didn't know what to do. And at that point, I think there was just a situation where we were like, we are losing money. We are here standing with our equipment. We were supposed to shoot. We don't know what we're going to do. We pretty much gave up that day. And I don't know how things work out. I don't know, maybe there's some god out there. We actually chanced upon a lady called Farida, who in that same community, and she used to run a handicraft center. And she said that my handicraft center was opened after BBC made a film on us, And she said, I'm very grateful to journalists for doing the work that they do. And she said, I'm going to, open our handicraft center to you. You can meet the women here. And if you find a subject whom you find interesting for your documentary, you can shoot with her. And she gave us the permission to do that, and we actually found Samira at the handicraft center. And for us it was a challenge initially to decide whether we want to go ahead with Samira or not, because Samira is an introvert, as you can see from the film. So a lot
Hmm.
of the we had to play a lot around her facial expressions, her eyes. So our original subject was an extrovert who was very outspoken, and then
Hmm.
we completely switched to an introvert, so our filming style also changed, and our thought processes also changed. So there was that's how we chanced upon Samira and her family, and we decided to shoot with them. And I think another factor that made us shoot with her was also the factor that she spoke Hindi, which is the language commonly spoken in India. So we didn't have a language barrier with her. So that was pretty much the long story of how we found the family.
That's crazy. With my interviews with the filmmakers, we always talk about pivoting because, people, it seems almost without fail, they go in with the idea of doing one film, but a lot of things happen during the filming and it keeps changing. I don't know if they've changed as crazy as the changes you had in your film, but can you talk about how important it is to be fluid and flexible for and being ready to change on a dime, and how maybe this experience might have been beneficial for you in the future?
Yeah, I think my experience as a journalist really helped here
Hmm.
because as a journalist, you always have to be prepared for scenarios where, a source may not talk to you, or, you may quote a source and the source backs out, says, I don't want my name going in the paper tomorrow. Like, I've been in these situations a lot of times. So I think for me, I was anyway prepared to be fluid and flexible. And I think that perspective really helped. But I mean, I know it's a big challenge for filmmakers, because if you go into onto the field saying that you're going to shoot with a certain subject and you raise funding, you also need to have the support from your funders. I was very grateful that the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting and my the producer of my film, Brent Huffman, they backed me up in this situation. They understood my situation. My mentor, Robin Sherman, also gave me suggestions on how to tackle it. So I had a very supportive set of people around me who really gave me that support to be flexible. So I have to also say this is a big factor to being flexible. I mean, I can individually be flexible, but the world around me may not be. But I was very lucky. And
Hmm.
I think for us as filmmakers and journalists, we have to always be prepared for situations where we have a plan A and we have a plan B and a plan C. So if
Hmm.
plan A doesn't work out, we shoot with plan B. If plan B doesn't work out, we have a plan C. So either we pivot the subject or we pivot the entire film. It's something we have to always keep in mind when we go on the field. And that's something I think I will be doing in whenever I shoot next.
If I read, please forgive me if I'm wrong, but was this your first documentary or had you done others before?
It's my first. Yeah, it came out of a class at Medill. I made a shorter documentary of I think 7 or 8 minutes in the class, and it was a video journalism class by Brent E. Huffman. And he saw my original film. It was on Afghans in Chicago. And my film was it was a student film. It was about how Afghans who came to the US after 2021, especially the ones who had worked with the American government, how they were finding it hard to integrate, what were the laws around it. So I had spoken to a refugee who had worked in the Afghan embassy as a translator, who moved in 2021. He could come, his brother couldn't come. So he was very anxious about that fact. Then I also interviewed a lawyer, a Pakistani Afghan American lawyer, who talked about the legal rights of these refugees. And we also looked at a non-profit. I also looked at a non-profit that was trying to integrate refugees into the US.
Hmm.
So when Brent saw that film, he encouraged me to look at the larger picture of Afghan refugees and do a longer film. And at that time, I took the call to look at my home country, India, because I just feel, as I told you, like there's not much talk about refugees in other parts of the world. We don't talk about refugees in Saudi Arabia or Iran or Pakistan that much, but they are always in the news. For example, in India, there is something coming out called the Citizenship Amendment Act, where the Indian government will be giving expedited citizenship to people of all religions except Islam from our neighboring countries. So that means the Afghan refugees who are Muslim, the Rohingyas from Bangladesh who are Muslim, they will not, even though they have been living in India for decades, they won't be able to qualify for citizenship. Their children may be born in India, they may have grown up in India, they may speak the language, but they will never be seen as Indian. So they're pretty much stuck. And they have to wait for the UNHCR to rehabilitate them to other countries. And the UNHCR will only do it if the case is very strong, and that's a very subjective matter. I mean, if I am from Taliban controlled Afghanistan, I mean, everybody who's escaping from there has a genuine cause. But that's the thing, right? It's sort of pitting people's grievances and people's struggles against each other. So it was just such a complicated scenario that I just said, okay, this is complicated. It'll be hard to get on film, but let's do it. And we did it. And I think we would ideally want to make a longer film on, just tracing the lives of these refugees who are escaping to these Asian countries. And you know because they don't have the resources to go to Europe, or they don't have the knowledge that they can actually go to Europe. And even getting to Europe itself is such a challenge, right? We have seen all the videos coming out of Lesbos and all the ships on the all the boats capsizing. It's a very sad state of affairs. So I think a film on refugees is relevant, um, be it any country, be it any part of the world. So I'm just glad that AmDocs recognized our film and gave these refugees a platform and a voice.
There was so much to the story. It's just I get a little overwhelmed with it, but it's just so like fascinating, just so unfathomable some of the stuff that you tell me. So forgive me sometimes if I go blank. I'm just trying to soak it all in. There's so much that's out of my norm. Um, it seems like you can do even more than just a feature-length documentary, even a series of documentaries. What kind of feedback have you gotten so far in terms of funding or support for doing a larger film or more series on the topic of refugees?
I think the biggest feedback we've got is working, like trying to understand the community a little better, and
Mhm.
also understanding the challenges that come with shooting on refugees, because that was the thing that happened with our original film. We had subjects coming in shooting with us and then backing out. We had a lawyer who shot with us and then backed out of the film saying it was too political. So now we'll have to figure out a situation where we find a topic that's relevant for international and Indian audiences. Yet it's a topic it needs to be told, and we have to shoot with a set of subjects who are reliable and who understand the ramifications of being part of a film on this topic, because it's a topic that's contentious in India at this point. And given that we have an election coming up, we have the possibility of this being probably the last democratic election. There's just too many moving parts in India right now, and the government is not, the refugees are not on the top of the government's list. And it's very hard to talk about this topic without flaring up people's emotions, because if we have to understand that, I think for us also as filmmakers, we have to understand that the topic of refugees in a country like India is a topic that's been contentious since we became independent. Like from 1947, it's been an issue. My grandparents were refugees. They became refugees overnight because India was partitioned. Pakistan was created. Pakistan and East Pakistan, which is present day Bangladesh, were created. So from then till now, it's been a contentious topic in this country. Refugees have been coming into the country since 47. My grandparents were integrated and seen as nationals because at that time there was no government or any structural position to think about a refugee law, so they were integrated. We had the Bangladesh war in 71. We had another stream of refugees coming in 71. We've had refugees coming in since, like, I mean, centuries. Like, this is India is not a country of it's not a homogeneous population. It's a population that's been created because they've been like, there's been the Mughals, there's been the Turkish invasions, there's been too many things going on in this country. So we have to understand its history. And I think getting that onto a film or explaining that to the subject might be very necessary. And that's some feedback I'm giving to myself, that when I get someone onto a film this complicated, I will be telling them that you have to understand that this is a contentious topic, and it's going to, if it blows up, it will blow up. But the point is that it should blow up in a positive way, right? You should not see the film as something that takes away from your career or something that puts you into trouble, because that's not what we are trying to do. We're trying to tell a story, we're trying to help these people. And
Mhm.
I really truly hope that if Samira's family gets that recognition on the international stage, and those her young boys get an opportunity at a better life, I think I've done my job as a filmmaker. So I think that's all I would. That's a very long answer to what you asked me. But yeah, that's the feedback I've been giving myself and I've been getting.
I mean, no, it's a great answer. Like I said, this is just for me, it's foreign, so I'm learning so much just talking to you and from what I saw in your film. Um, on a pivot a little bit, just a little bit lighter, just your experiences of being in Palm Springs at AmDocs. How did you like being in Palm Springs? How was your AmDocs experience?
Oh my God, I love Palm Springs. I think I was obsessed with the place. More, yeah, more than the film festival. I was just obsessed with the place. It's so beautiful. It's so welcoming. My homestay hosts were the best. Special shout out to Tamara. Thank you so much, Tamara and her family. I had such a great time. I just think it's a fantastic film festival. It felt so hard. It felt so good to see that there are people interested in seeing indie filmmakers who they want to see student filmmakers flourish and make these films. And when I was I was sitting in the in the audience watching all the films of my fellow filmmakers and also other filmmakers. It just gave me so much hope that there is a better future out there, because there are people who care about filmmaking, who care about stories being told to the world. Because I think the way the world is heading, it's a very scary situation where they have fundamentalist coming up across the world, free speech is being stifled. And when there are film festivals like AmDocs, which really give these filmmakers a platform to talk about issues that matter to the world, it really makes a difference, whole lot of difference to us. And your selection of films was absolutely fantastic. I just loved most of the films that were screened there. So thank you so much for doing what you do and giving us this opportunity. I think everybody should come attend AmDocs and see all the films being screened there. It's just such a fantastic film festival. I definitely do want to come back. I want to come back even if my film is not being screened. I want to come back as a viewer next year, definitely.
Well, you've just been hired as ambassador. You, no one could do that better. We loved everything you said, and we'll give another shout out to Teddy Goya, who's our founder, and he screens all the films and he makes the selection. And, Teddy does such a great job selecting such a wonderful blend of films that are very insightful and important. Let's talk about importance of journalism. Journalism, a lot of struggles around the country. Can you talk about the relationship between journalism and documentaries and what kind of future you see with that? I'll just share something with me is, when I was a sports writer, I always thought, oh, someday I may do a documentary because it'll give me a chance to really dig into my stories where I don't have deadline pressures and I'll have more space for more time. And now I see it as more crucial because there's a lot of complicated topics that need a lot of time. To me, it feels like documentary is a very important element for journalism moving forward because we're just not getting full stories. What are your thoughts about the future of the two and their relations?
Lighten, it's pretty similar to what you said, because I think that was my sentiment going into this film. That there's so many stories that I want to tell, but then I feel that the visual medium just allows me to tell these stories, and there's so much that I can do with it. And that was pretty much my thought process going into it. And I would say I did meet another journalist who turned filmmaker at IDA, who made a film called Sugarcane, which is on Indigenous people in Canada. So everybody should watch that as well. And I feel that when journalists turn filmmakers, what happens is that we as journalists we can tell a story, and our perspective is very unique because this is a journalistic perspective. We view the subjects as people with empathy, with emotions. We go into the film with this kind of this emotion that these subjects matter to the world and their stories to need to be told, and that's a very unique perspective. Like, I'll give you an example. When we were shooting, there was one of the days when one of the subjects in the film, not the key subject, one of the subjects, she fainted while filming, and we had to rush her to the hospital. and my cinematographer and I, we were, running around trying to find a local doctor before we decided to take her to the hospital. And my cinematographer at that time, he's a filmmaker, and his idea was, let's shoot her while we take her to the hospital, and which is his perspective as a filmmaker. But my perspective was that the story is not about health crisis. It's not about these things that we want to shoot. It's, if we would have done a larger film, then probably we would have taken the consent and gone through it at that point. But for me as a journalist, it was necessary that my subject stays safe and she's alive and she's lives and breathes and everything's fine. So we took the call to not shoot with her at that time, and we took her to the hospital. We did a sequence with her later that you will see in Far From Home, where you see Samira standing with the other subject in front of a hospital talking about that that subject fell ill, that when she went to the hospital, then Samira went with her, and she discovered she's unwell. So we did a sequence later. But I think
Hmm.
at that time, as a journalist, I took that call, and I think it was very important to do that because I saw my subject as, at that point, I didn't see this as a film. I saw this as how I would do this as a journalist. For me, the subject safety mattered the most. And I'm
Hmm.
sure filmmakers do that as well.
Hmm.
But when you are a filmmaker, you think about films a certain way, versus when you're a journalist, you think about subjects a certain way. So if we can marry these two, it'll just be such a great perspective.
Hmm.
And my cinematographer also came to understand my perspective, which is why we did that sequence later in front of the hospital when she was fine, she was standing and she could talk. She looked unwell, obviously, but
Hmm.
we just married these two perspectives. I understood his perspective, which is as
Hmm.
a filmmaker, because it's just the tragedy. Can you imagine the tragedy of these refugees, that they are unable to sit and stand and talk properly, they're fainting, they're unwell, there's no health resources for them. Like when we took her to the hospital, like I paid the hospital fees because she didn't have money at that time, her son wasn't there, she didn't have the money, and we had to do all these things. And then her son finally came and he paid the hospital fees. But you know getting those footages into the film would have been very hard at that time, because it was just something as a journalist I thought I couldn't do,
Hmm.
because of my journalistic integrity came in between. And in these are conversations I think we're very scared to have in a
Hmm.
lot of places, in newsrooms and filmmaking. I think we should have these conversations,
Yeah.
and I think that's why we need to have journalists turning filmmakers, filmmakers probably becoming journalists.
Hmm.
There's so much that we can do, there's so much synthesis that can happen. And I think that's the future of journalism, given the state of journalism in this country and everywhere else, where
Hmm.
local news, is the news deserts coming up. Local news publications are closing down. Hedge funds, private equity firms are buying newspapers, and um,
Hmm.
just milking as much money as possible from them. We are just losing a lot of good journalists. So I think it's time that we, as journalists, start getting into this kind of a profession where we bring our unique perspective to it. But I would like to add that it's always makes sense to work with a filmmaker, because a
Hmm.
filmmaker has been in the business for a while. A filmmaker knows filmmaking better than us.
Hmm.
So I think getting those perspectives together is very essential. So I don't know if I may have angered some people by giving this example, but I just want to say that it's coming from a place of truth and honesty. And I just really feel that it's necessary to um for people to have these conversations so that we can really have that, find that perfect blend between journalism and filmmaking. There is a synthesis there, that I can tell you. So
Yeah.
it's, yeah.
No, you raised important questions with the scenario you went through, and I really appreciate you doing that. I think a lot of it comes down to, you know, it also comes down to credibility and trust with your subjects. I think, if you use that, it could feel very exploitative of someone who's going through a health crisis. And I think you made a smart move. And obviously these are questions that we can just talk philosophically now. But I think you got to do what you think is right. Just in retrospect, we talk about that. I think that was a smart move to do for the story, but also for the health of your subject. But also it helps establish the trust in your integrity with your subject and the other people you talk with, because you're here to tell a story, not exploit their story. So I feel like you did the right thing. I mean, other people have different opinions about it. I mean, we're in journalism. You know how we deal with a lot of different opinions from editors and whatever. But I really appreciate and admire what you did. So I think that was
Thank
very
you.
important.
And I also feel that as a journalist, we also tend to have this perspective, futuristic perspective about things, that we know that if we win the subject's trust, the subject will open up to us even more. Because I think as journalists turned filmmakers, our challenge is we have a certain number of days to shoot with that person, and there's so many moving parts. It's you can build a relationship with the subject, obviously, but
Hmm.
that thing takes time, months, years.
Hmm.
For us, we were running against time at that time because we changed our subject. We had to build a
Hmm.
relationship with the subject. We were shooting with another person, so we were just doing too many things at once. And I think for me as a journalist, I saw the futuristic perspective that if we let these shots go, we will get a good shot in the future where the subject might just say, I am going to the hospital, do you want to come along? And that's exactly what happened. The next day,
Yeah.
the subject just said, "Why do you want to accompany us? Do you want to get Samira, the main subject, accompany me?" And I think opening up that trust really helped, because even after we were done with the film, I maintained that relationship with that person. I kept checking in on her. How are you doing? How are things? And now she,
Hmm.
sends me photos of her opening a bakery and everything. And it's
Oh,
just really heartwarming. I
that's
just
awesome.
feel, yeah, I really feel that I have maintained that relationship. And I just feel that it's just at that point that one decision really made a difference, because now her heart has opened up, the community has opened up for us, we have that access. So if we want to make a film in the future, I think they'll welcome us with open arms. So
Hmm.
I think it was a good call too at that point. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the questions I asked people, you kind of answered it already, was trust. When you go into someone's life and you ask them to open up and share their lives, you have to have that trust for them to actually open their hearts and open and share what their experiences are. Because sometimes it's very tough, especially topics you're talking about where there could be consequences. And I think trust is such an important thing. Can you talk about how important it is to establish that trust with your subject? I know we've talked a little bit about it already, but just a little bit specifically about your process in establishing that trust to have people open up to you and trust you and tell you the full story, I guess.
Absolutely. I think this is such an important question. And I'll just say, when I was a journalist, when I used to work with video teams, for us it was like we have a small news story, and we just go on the field, we get what information we need, and we come back. That's how exactly how I shot videos. So I didn't realize how tough it was to, enter somebody's house and tell them, open up your lives to us, because it seems very simple. If you see any documentary, um, you know, um, I had seen a film called Three Songs of Benazir. I think that's the name. I'd seen that. I'd seen a lot of other documentaries before going into this filmmaking, and filmmakers make the process seem so easy. And that's I think the essence behind a very good film. Like, there's a film called Writing with Fire, All That Breathes. All these films, it seems like you are part of the subject's life. And when I went on the ground, I understood how difficult it is to get the feeling that you are a part of their life, and they're opening up. Like, for example, if somebody enters my house with a camera and says, I want to shoot every day of your life, I don't think I'll be able to allow that. I don't think I'll be so conscious around the camera.
Hmm.
So the fact that Samira let down her guard and she was just herself, and her family was just letting us be there with our camera, I think that speaks a lot about the subject. And I think we need to give credit to the subject. I would say, less credit to the filmmaker, more credit to the subject, because the subject has really accepted a camera around them. And we have to also understand, these are not people who are coming from urban spaces, literate spaces, who understand what a camera is around them, right?
Hmm.
Like, I know
Right.
how to perform in front of a camera. Like, if you put me, I'm on a Zoom call with you. I know
Hmm.
exactly how to move my hand, how to talk, how to appear polished. These are people who have never, i- imagined a better life for themselves. Forget being on front of a camera. So they
Hmm.
don't know how to conduct themselves in front of a camera. So they don't understand that, like for us, as journalists, for us the key is we have to look nice in front of the camera. They don't get these things. So we
Hmm.
have to also understand that they are people who come from a different perspective. So we have to be very aware of our privilege when we are shooting with them. Like,
Hmm.
I cannot go on the field and say that, Samira, you have to pose this certain way, or you have to say these things. I can't force her to say things. She
Hmm.
has to say those things when she wants to say them.
Hmm.
She may not give me the information I need. As a filmmaker, have to find a way to work around that. And I think that's something that we need to understand as filmmakers and as journalists. to build the trust with the subject. And trust doesn't is not an overnight thing.
Hmm.
Trust takes time. It's not something like when I finished the film, I kept a relationship ongoing with the community because I just want to build that trust and relationship, because for me they are not people with whom I just shot and I forgot about them. And
Hmm.
I think that's my perspective that changed, because as a journalist, I usually used to go on the field, be subjective, forget about my subjects, come back, because that's how we're trained as journalists. We're trained to
Hmm.
not build a relationship with the subject, not get emotional, not get invested. But if I'm a filmmaker, I have to be invested in the community, because tomorrow, if somebody else wants to make a film on this topic and they come to me, I have to be the person to tell them that don't treat them as people whom you just go and shoot one reel with and come back. They are not, they are living, breathing, empathetic individuals with aspirations. And
Hmm.
unless you understand that, you can't shoot with them, and you shouldn't
Hmm.
shoot with them. So
Right.
I want to say that with the right, that the way I'm saying it now, I need to build that relationship myself with them. So
Hmm.
I am always available for Samira and her family. If they even send me a hello, I always reply. If she sends me a voice note saying, "You look really nice in your DP," I get back to her and I say, "Yes, thank you so much. You look really nice too." So, it's always a good idea to keep that relationship going and build that trust. So, this is a very important question. Thank you for asking it.
Oh no, it's important for me too when I was a journalist because I always believed in them having trust. I always tell people I'm a salesperson. If I don't sell, if you don't trust me, then it's just not going to work on any level because I want you to open up. I want you to let me into your life, and we don't let just anyone into our lives. We don't want someone to trivialize or make our lives look silly. So I really believe in trust, and you obviously did that in a very difficult situation. So I think that's one of the many things I admired about your film. What little I saw. I'm sorry I had to go in and out. It was a busy day, but we're running out of time. I really, uh, I really appreciate your time. I really love this interview and really admired everything you're doing. And we didn't get a chance to go into it, but Akita is a very accomplished journalist, even before she did this film. So I'm excited to see what you're going to do next.
Thank you so much, Lighten. It was such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for taking our time.
Oh, well, thank you. And just to remind everyone, we have our dates for next year's AmDocs. Akita said she's going to be there. It's July 27th. No, not July. I'm sorry. I'm thinking about another thing. It's March 27th through 31st in Palm Springs. And then if you're a filmmaker, we're taking submissions right now. So if you got a film, if it's ready, send it over. Or if you have a good rough draft, send that over uh, with the intent that you'll get it done by the end of the year. Um, Akita, thank you so much. Medill always has these great students and the great films, and you are there. You are amongst the top of the list. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Okay, you too.